Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Thanks for joining us today, this afternoon, this morning, whatever time it is where you're joining us from. My name is Alicia Grow, and we're going to get started here to frame today's webinar, and then we'll dive into what should be a great session together. So this is the webinar from the National Center for Diligent Recruitment entitled Bringing Your Diligent Recruitment Plan to Life, Developing a Meaningful Implementation Plan. As I said, I'm Alicia Grow. I'm a consultant with the National Center for Diligent Recruitment, and I will let my colleague Margarita introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Margarita Hughes-Assink, and I am a National Child Welfare Advisor.
Great. Thanks, Margarita. We're really excited to have you all here today joining us, and we're excited to talk through all sorts of ideas about implementing your diligent recruitment plan, how to really make that a living approach to implementation. I do want to note that we received some great questions from many of you as you registered for today's webinar. And so we are hoping to at least touch on several of those questions. Some of them we won't get to today, but many of them we'll be sort of weaving in and addressing as part of our presentation. So let's go to the next slide. Just briefly, some housekeeping here. As you have hopefully been notified, as you joined, this webinar is being recorded, and so we'll share the recording link with you, and it'll be available on our NCDR website. Also, we know that we want this webinar to be interactive, even though we can't open it up for everyone to be talking directly. We want there to be opportunities for interaction. So one is that we encourage you to use the chat. You can submit questions. We'll also have a time later in the webinar for some interactivity through the chat. So we hope you'll be able to make good use of that. We also have a couple of poll questions throughout the webinar as another way for you to engage and for you to see what responses your peers from around the country have to those poll questions. And then also, we really do ask you to fill out the evaluation survey that you'll receive after the webinar. We take our evaluation of our programs and services very seriously and doing our ongoing continuous quality improvement to support our effective work. So we really value getting that input from all of you to let us know how things worked, what could be better, how we can keep supporting you in your work related to diligent recruitment. Let's go to the next slide. Great. So for today, we're going to be covering several things. As always, we have a somewhat ambitious agenda, but we hope it'll be really rich for all of you. One, we just kind of set the stage about why are we talking about this in terms of implementing diligent recruitment, and then getting into key concepts for implementing your diligent recruitment plan, and really those sort of foundational ideas to keep in mind. Then, because we always like to get concrete and offer specific ideas that you can put to use, we're going to highlight several tips and strategies for effective implementation. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, we are going to have an interactive part of this webinar, some interactive discussion, helping you think about your thoughts on implementing your diligent recruitment plans or your diligent recruitment strategies, and showing you an option for how you can help do some of that brainstorming with your colleagues as well. As always, we want to highlight some resources that we think will be helpful to support you in your work. And then we will have time towards the end of the webinar to, we hope, be able to address your questions, get answers either from us or from you all that you can share with each other in the chat, and get any other comments from all of you. So hopefully that sounds like a webinar that you want to spend the next, 72 minutes on. Let's go to the next slide. So briefly, I want to introduce you a bit more to our National Center for Diligent Recruitment. I think many of you are familiar with us and the work that we do, but we want to make sure everyone knows who we are. So we are funded by the federal government, by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and their Children's Bureau office. And so we have several key goals here that really frame all of our work as we provide services free of charge to states, tribes, and territories. So one goal is that we're really looking to increase the capacity of states, tribes, and territories to collect data to guide focused recruitment. We know that this work really needs to be data-driven throughout all parts of diligent recruitment. We also provide on-site, so that's in-person technical assistance to support diligent recruitment planning and really to support ongoing diligent recruitment implementation as well. Let's go to the next slide. Additionally, we really are aiming to help develop effective models of diligent recruitment based on research and to further the evidence base on family finding, on relative outreach, supporting reunification, and intensive recruitment and retention services. So all of this is aimed at helping states, tribes, and territories be more effective at the whole range of work involved in diligent recruitment, and really with that ultimate goal of improving outcomes for children and families. Let's go to the next slide. So our learning objectives for today, we have several. Again, we like to try to aim high for our webinars. One is we really want to share so that you have information about actionable approaches for implementing your diligent recruitment plan, things you can really take away and put to use. We hope that participants will also really recognize the value of connecting your diligent recruitment plan and those implementation activities to other important priorities in your child welfare system. We're hoping that you'll learn about how other child welfare systems who are participating today and others that we're bringing in ideas from, how they approach implementing diligent recruitment strategies and activities. We're also hoping that you'll leave here with a deeper understanding of the value of tracking progress and measuring your impact as part of implementation work, so that you can really know what's working and what's not. And we want to help you identify perhaps some additional ways that you can engage people with lived experience and lived expertise in the work of really doing that implementation planning and implementation work for diligent recruitment. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to do the first of our polls here. So we're going to start up a poll and then we hope you'll respond on your screen. So the question here is, does your diligent recruitment plan, meaning whatever diligent recruitment plan you have for your agency or your system, does it have detailed implementation approaches included in it, such as action steps, people responsible, timeframes? You may have other details, hopefully measurement approaches. So you can respond yes or no, or I don't know. We realize it's not giving you a range of nuance for the options, but we just want to get a quick read here. We'll give it a few more seconds. Many of you have already responded. We'll see if anybody else wants to chime in. All right. Looks like our responses have slowed down. So I'm going to close the poll and then share the results so you can see 62% of you said that yes, your diligent recruitment plan does have some detailed implementation approaches included, which is great to hear. 19% said no, which is also very common from what we see around the country. And then 19% didn't know, which is also fine. You may not be someone who has a role right now or has had a role in seeing the direct diligent recruitment plan. So all of that works fine. Hopefully all that we have to cover today will be relevant for all of you. And for those of you that do have detailed implementation approaches included in your diligent recruitment plan, we'd really love to have you share thoughts on what you're finding helpful. If you have approaches that you're using for covering those details and for tracking those details, I know others on today's webinar would love to hear it. So with that, let's go on to the next slide. So now's when we're going to get into a little more of the heart of this. And so I get to hand things over to Margarita for you to hear as we go through several key concepts about implementing your diligent recruitment plan. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Alicia. All right, let's go ahead and start with the next slide. Is it moving forward for anyone? Casey, can you move it forward? Perfect. Thank you so much. So, key concepts. I just want to preface this by telling y'all this is not the end all be all. This is like the nitty gritty kind of bottom lining you what you need to know. This is the main points within diligent recruitment. So first and foremost, you want to make your diligent recruitment plan a living document. This is not a one and done. This is something that is going to be changing and evolving over time. So we want to be very intentional in the ways in which we're rolling out all of the strategies in this plan. So these strategies and priority areas within diligent recruitment plans, they're going to be related to other key child welfare system programs. So things that you have going on within your specific agencies, your diligent recruitment plan should very much be in line with this. So to be successful, you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional. So a lot of the questions that were coming in prior to this webinar were best practices. What are the best recruitment approaches to take? How do we engage this specific population? There's no magic answer for you, unfortunately. Believe me, if I had all the answers, I would share them with you, no holds barred. But we don't have one because, again, it's going to be intentional and it's going to be very specific to your area and the families that you're serving, and the families living within the communities that you're serving. So, again, be intentional, change things, try new things, think outside of the box. If it doesn't work, go back and change it. There's nothing wrong with that. So make sure that this stays a living document, that you're able to flow with all of the changes going on within your communities, within the resources that we have, or maybe you don't have. So again, keep things in line with whatever is going on in your area at the time. The practice models, whether you have PIPs in place, everything should really be mimicking your agency and what that stands for. So take into consideration any specific policies that your state or your agency or your area may hold, any requirements that you're held to, and kind of go based along that flow. Next slide, please. So in looking at the slide, what I want you to take away from this, you should not be doing this just continuously. This can be very overwhelming. Okay. Don't just say, okay, today we're just going to do diligent recruitment. Today is the day that we are going to target all of those specific populations that we're lacking, and then we're going to be done. This is an ongoing thing. This has to be done within the flow of your entire recruitment plan. So it's gonna, if you break things up, just as with any recruitment plan, it's going to be less overwhelming. Look ahead, create your plans, make it manageable for your team. We're all struggling to find homes, right? Any home to take a child. There's no reason that you can't sneak in your diligent recruitment within your day-to-day recruitment plans that you have. Okay. So we want to make sure that you are looking ahead and planning out your years, thinking about diligent recruitment as well. So don't just focus on things like Black History Month. And okay, this month we're just going to focus on recruiting our Black and African American populations. Or for the month of June, we're focusing on LGBTQIA plus families for Pride. Keep it going year round. Someone had asked about, should we be implementing this on a weekly basis? How can I do something every week for diligent recruitment? Again, that can be crazy overwhelming. You'll burn yourselves out. But if you look at that broader picture and you look at things as part of your entire recruitment plan, it's not going to seem so scary. It won't be so overwhelming. And again, don't be afraid to change things up. We're doing this by trial and error. We're trying new recruitment events. We're trying new tactics to bring homes in. Some may be crazy successful. Some may seem like a bit of a waste of your time. So you chalk it up to the experience and you move on. Make sure that you're taking clear notes of how many attendees did we have? How many people followed through? Who attended an orientation following this to really find what's going to be the most successful. If it doesn't work, scrap it, but make sure that you're going back and really analyzing why it didn't work. Was it a matter of poor marketing? Was it a matter of we didn't have enough staff to even man a table for the entire event? Really look at those things so that you can fill in the gaps later on. Next slide, please. So additional key concepts. So we want to have an implementation plan with a clear way of tracking progress. So I know additional questions came up here. Some of y'all might be lucky enough to have a computer system that works amazingly and it can track all these awesome, wonderful things for you. And then others may not be so lucky, right? So it really depends what you're working with. But before carrying out your plan, you really need to make sure that you have a concrete idea of what data you're going to need in order to measure your successes. So you have to ensure that your outcomes are going to be measurable and that you're able to produce the data that's necessary to really illustrate that. So it may not always be something that's carefully tracked in our computer systems, right? So it may take your own diligence and your own expertise to properly track numbers. So when you're going into this, take some of these things into consideration. What are the requirements? What do you need to report? What is your administration team looking for from you? What's the cost? Are there events that you can do that would be just as successful for little or no cost? How many attendees did you have? How many inquiries came following the event? How many staff were needed? And how much time was required? Because not only do we want to be careful with our money, but we want to be careful with our time as well, because that time could be allocated towards different events. Next slide, please. Ooh, another audience poll. Okay. So we're going to have another poll. I want to see a lot of participation because this is going to be extremely helpful for us. So which of these statements do you agree with? And you can select all that apply. Okay. So our agency has a clear plan for how we will implement all parts of our diligent recruitment plan. I don't expect to see a lot of those because then y'all probably wouldn't be here. Or it's hard to know which parts of our diligent recruitment plan to prioritize for implementation. We are competing with other agency priorities for attention and prioritization for our diligent recruitment plan implementation. We don't have clear lead people identified for individual activities in our diligent recruitment plan. We have some identified measurable indicators of success for our diligent recruitment plan strategies, or none of the above. We got to start implementing some background music when these polls are going through. All right, got a little over half participating. That's good. All right. Can we get to 70%? Yes, we can. I like it. All right, 75%, I will take it. I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to share my results with y'all. So 18% of you said, you know what? We got this. Our agency has a clear plan of how we're going to implement all parts of our diligent recruitment plan. That's great. What I will ask from that 18%, share the wealth. Share with your partners, share with your community partners, with your neighboring agencies. Let's help each other out. 35% of you said it's really hard to know which parts of our diligent recruitment plan to prioritize for implementation. Clearly, y'all are not alone. Some of us do not even know where to begin. A whopping 60% of you, okay, we are competing with other agency priorities for attention and prioritization for our diligent recruitment plan implementation. That's okay. I've been there. I feel your stress. I do. We have placement crises that are taking priority. They're honest about the numbers. We have to perform up to par. So I get it. I get it. 21%, we don't have clear lead people identified for individual activities in our diligent recruitment plan. 24%, we have identified measurable indicators of success for our diligent recruitment plan. And 6% of you, none of the above. All right. So biggest piece of this, y'all, you're not alone. Your peers are right there with you. We're all worried about the same things. We all have, the same stressors in mind. So I get it. Next slide, please. All right, some tips and strategies for your implementation. So here you are. We're going to give you some magic potion to where we're going to solve all your problems here, right? No, again, these are tips and strategies for implementation. So what's going to work in one area may not work in the next area. Again, You have to take a look at the community in which you're serving and really cater to it. That's what diligent recruitment is, y'all. We have to look at our individualized area and see what it is that we're lacking and where we need to fill in those gaps. All right, next slide. So first and foremost, like I said earlier, really crosswalk your diligent recruitment strategies with your other major programs, your plans, and your priorities within your child welfare system. So your PIP strategies that you have from your child and family services review, expanding of kinship care. That's huge for all of us. Prevention and family support efforts, and then data system improvements. Look at opportunities for aligning with these other programs. Now, this is a great strategy because it allows your licensing and your certification teams to really gain support from your internal partners, everyone within your agency, and that's huge. So here are times that your team could potentially team up with foster care teams, with protective services teams, prevention teams, or any other team within your agency, or maybe even within your region. You can all look at that common goal you may have and work together. So, example, many of our states, they're talking, they're taking that big focus on addressing racial disparities, right? Within our systems, they're creating programming and partnerships surrounding this issue. These are prime times that you can build off those partnerships. So I had the opportunity when I was leading a licensing team and I was serving within a diverse community, mind you, but looking at our roster of foster parents, we had very few families of color. They're all, middle class white families. So along came this opportunity to partner with one of the largest Black and African American churches in the area. And this was a partnership that had already been created with our prevention staff. And they had said, hey, Margarita, does your staff want to join us? Do you want to come along? This was a perfect opportunity for us to pair up. We're all wanting to ensure that our community is safe. We have that same common goal, and we want to support our Black and African American communities together. So what we did was we were able to support that church in one of their annual events, which in this instance, it was like an anti-gun violence carnival that they did every year. We brought different things to pass out. We brought games. We brought information about all of the services within our agency, in addition to information regarding the population of Black and African American children in foster care, just to share that education and really get the community to understand what's going on. And in turn, the church has continued to invite this team back to participate in the event, but they were also open to having our team come and speak during one of their sermons to talk about disproportionality in foster care, to talk about the need for more Black and African American foster parents, to talk about the need for foster parents for children over the age of 6, and they agreed to hang up banners within their church, in addition to keeping pamphlets there for information all year round. So it's about leaning on one another, leaning on your community members, leaning on your internal partners to really move forward. So one, you're going to have to know who your target populations are, where your specific agency is lacking. Look at the data, look at the numbers, and you have to have that in. So in this instance, the prevention team was our in. They had already established that connection. But look at your internal partners. Look at their teams. Who are they involved with? Does anyone on your team play community sports? What churches do they attend? What clubs and organizations do they support? Look and see what that could bring about. Everything is an opportunity. This is also a good opportunity to establish some cultural brokers. Now, my team of 4, I can't even call them middle-aged, they're a little bit younger, white women, could not have just walked into that Black church without having their cultural broker. And I told them, can't continue to be your cultural broker for every minority group that you serve. So we did bring around our prevention team who had members of their team who were Black and African American men and women. And we took them to some of the events. Some of them were members of this church. So we had that in. They were able to kind of smooth the edges for us and open those doors for us and really helped us to strengthen the relationships that we carried within that church. Next slide, please. Consider your sequencing and your dependencies. So you want to look at what strategies and activities need to happen first so that you can start to implement other strategies. What's the priority? What's most important to get done sooner? And what strategies need to still be on hold until some other decisions get made or other things need to happen? So again, our plans are very agency specific. They're very agency driven. So as leaders, it's up to us to really help prioritize it and look at that bigger picture and see where we want to go. So we don't want to throw out something just very last minute just for the purpose of getting it out there. We want to make sure that we're taking the time to look back. What kind of quality event can we put together? And what does our team need in order to successfully pull this event off? So that might mean taking a step back from putting an event on to ensure that your team has the proper training and proper resources to host such event. So that might mean ensuring that all of the staff has taken a cultural competency training, that all of the staff is comfortable talking about race or talking to people from different cultural groups. And remember, you want to really establish that relationship with a community partner before you just jump in and ask them for something. You want to make sure that that foundation is laid, that you at least have this introductory meeting, talk about expectations, talk about the levels of support that you're able to provide to one another, and just really be strategic. Elizabeth, did you have a question? If you're asking, you're on mute. Otherwise, you can feel free to throw questions in the chat at any point. Going once, going twice. All right, next slide. Oh, go ahead. Oh, please put it in the chat then, Elizabeth, if you do have a question, because I don't believe y'all are even able to unmute. Thank you. Okay, Casey, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. We all love talking about data, right? Use your data to help you make decisions about areas of focus, areas to prioritize for implementation. Where can you get the biggest bang for your buck? What areas of diligent recruitment practice and outcomes need the most attention and need that prioritization? And where do we have the most significant disparities that we need to address? So again, we have to identify what data we need, but also, how are we going to make best use of that data? It's not just about collecting it and then you're done. You have to really analyze that data. So one of our most underutilized tools that we have is the ability to complete geomapping. I love geomapping. So this is a great place to start when you're building your diligent recruitment plan, because what you're doing essentially is just taking the numbers from your communities, see which zip codes or which areas are having the most removals. But then you're taking that and you're comparing it to the foster homes and the population and where those foster homes are located. And you're able to kind of see where those gaps lie. So in looking at those gaps, it's going to be a great roadmap in where we need to start and which areas you need to start plugging into and ensuring that your marketing is there. So that information is very telling, and it's vital for your teams to best determine where to start focusing your efforts or where we need to continue some ongoing efforts. Now, not all of us are data experts, right? So this is where you can really lean on um, any data analysts that may be within your networks. Your analysts are going to be some of your best friends. Lean on them. This is their area of expertise. Pull in your internal partners and really establish those relationships in order to get all of the information that you're going to need to ensure that your diligent recruitment plan is successful and the implementation runs smoothly. All right. Alicia, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you. So much great information. Thank you for all of that. And more to come, everybody, from Margarita. So let's go to the next slide. As we talk a lot about things you can do and how to sequence and how to roll things out, I can almost feel the stress levels through the webinar platform about we don't have time to do all of these things. We're stretched thin. We're guessing you are all or most of you facing all sorts of workforce challenges. And so here's the tip that this is a little bit of the eat your vegetables tip of things you may not want to hear, but that's really important to think about. As you start rolling out various activities and designing your implementation plan and having probably new ideas that you're excited about, one of the most important things to do is to really reflect on the question of what do we need to stop doing? Or what do we need to scale back significantly? Sometimes people don't want to stop all the way. Um, but this is where the prioritization gets really hard, and it's also why it's so important, because if we keep adding more to our plate, we're going to stretch ourselves even more thin, but we're also not going to be as effective at these new strategies that we're trying out because we're only able to juggle so many things all at once. And so looking at this from a data-driven perspective, as Margarita said earlier, we need to be looking at what's working or what isn't. And if things aren't working, do we understand why? Is it something we can redesign and try in a new way? Or should we say, you know what, we tried that idea for several rounds or several years and it didn't really work. Maybe we need to stop, or maybe we need to pause it at least. And I think this is where looking at things through that really kind of, I often say, the ruthless prioritization lens, say what's really going to help us recruit and retain the families that we need for the specific children and youth in care in our system. And so often when people are willing to engage in these conversations about what do we need to stop doing, there are often things that we do as part of diligent recruitment, whether it's recruitment strategies or support strategies or recognition strategies that we've been doing forever. We know how to do it. We can do it kind of in our sleep. We feel comfortable with it. And so people are reluctant to give those up either because maybe it's Alicia's brainchild and she loves doing it, or we've always done it that way. Those are the things we really need to look at and say, if we've always done it that way and we're still not getting what we need from our diligent recruitment efforts, maybe we need to stop doing some of those things and we need to rethink. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of these ideas as well later in the webinar about kind of how to turn some things upside down, perhaps. But as people are hearing, we need new ideas, we need new ideas. One of the key things is also to say, what do we need to kind of edit out from our diligent recruitment plan, so that we can really devote the energy, the staff time, the partnerships, the other resources, the funding, to those things that are going to be most effective. Let's go to the next slide. So as many of you know and are probably living on a day-to-day basis, for diligent recruitment work, from recruitment to training, licensing, support, other forms of retention efforts, we're often doing this in partnership. And in many child welfare systems, in many states and tribes and in territories, a lot of the diligent recruitment work is either contracted out or done through partnerships with a lot of community partners and not just in the single child welfare public agency. And so your partners are truly important in the success of implementation for your diligent recruitment plan. And so one of the key things is to really look at how are we as a child welfare system or as an agency really ensuring that we are engaging our partners and communicating our goals and our priorities and our direction for diligent recruitment work, and ensuring alignment in practice and approaches and priorities with those partners. Often we look at approaches where we say, well, we have a long-standing partnership with this organization or a long-standing contract. And so they keep kind of running on their own. And you may change directions a little bit. You may say, in looking at our data, we've identified new priorities as we focus much more on being kinship first and kinship centered. Maybe that's shifting a lot of approaches and practices in diligent recruitment. You need to make sure that you're bringing all of your partners along in those conversations and helping them look at what implementation looks like on their end so that they can really be aligned in that holistic approach to diligent recruitment. So be sure to share information as you're developing your vision. Engage partners in those conversations about what are our goals, what are our expectations, what are those needs that we're seeing, and talk with them about what do they need from you so that they can be part of aligning with your plan and really that their implementation efforts can really be going alongside and heading in the same direction that you're heading. And often it requires looking into some of the more detailed pieces like contract requirements, or if you're doing grants, and grant requirements or MOUs, what was outlined maybe a couple years ago, maybe several years ago, that might actually create barriers or have your partners pointing in different directions. If there are specific activities or deliverables that were written into a contract or an MOU um, that that your partners still feel obligated to deliver on, but those may not align with where you're headed now. If you've seen shifts in your needs or your areas of focus for diligent recruitment, there might be barriers there. Or if there are barriers to sharing data and data tracking or reporting with outside entities, that could be another barrier for having your partners really being able to align. So really look at those structural pieces as you think about your implementation plan. Some of your implementation plan might be things like your activities might include things like review contracts and arrangements with external partners. So that part doesn't feel like doing diligent recruitment necessarily, but it's a key part of really making those systemic changes so that everyone is heading in the same direction to meet your diligent recruitment needs. Let's go to the next slide. So we're trying to make this feel less overwhelming. As Margarita said early on, we know this can feel like a lot. We know many of you on this webinar today. We've worked with you in various ways. We know it does feel like a lot any given day or week or month. And it is a lot. Diligent recruitment is asking a lot, and it's trying to really move practice and move outcomes in good directions for children and families. And we know that that is not a quick fix. And it takes a lot of really creative thinking and a lot of sustained effort. And so what we want to encourage you throughout this webinar is to think about what are ways to make this feel more manageable. And one thing is this idea of really identifying those bite-sized pieces of work. So you probably have some fantastic strategies and some fantastic goals in your diligent recruitment plan that when you look at them, you might get really excited about, and then you might think, how on earth are we going to do that? And it can feel daunting, and it can make you close that document very quickly and just walk away and tackle something else. So as you think about your implementation planning approach, really talk through what are some ways we can break things down into smaller pieces. If we need to improve our data system and our data collection and tracking, that can certainly feel daunting. But think about what are some small steps we can take. Could we start reviewing our data through a more of a racial equity lens and really look at, for example, disproportionality rates, or could we look at disparities perhaps across race and ethnicity for how families move through from inquiry to licensure or certification? Can we have some understanding there? So it's not necessarily revamping the whole data system, but what are the next few steps we could take? And those are some great ways to make things more manageable and to help build some of that momentum and help people see, okay, then what are the next 2 or 3 steps we can take? And this is where engaging your partners, your staff at multiple levels can be really helpful because they can say, well, even if we can't do the full thing, could we at least ask these 3 questions? Or could we at least try, building out this new piece of our orientation, something like that. Also, since a lot of places look at forming committees or subcommittees or implementation teams, whatever you may call it, we really encourage you to think about setting them up not just in name, but really in structure and in terms of the what they're asked to do with a real focus on action. So you can think of them as action groups or working groups, but beyond, again, just what you title them, think about having a team charter or a clear direction for those groups that might be sort of time limited. It might be this is a 9-month action group or a working group with these specific deliverables. So it doesn't become just another committee where we talk about things and identify barriers, but it really is action oriented. And again, you can give them those tasks that are more broken down, perhaps say, like, here are a few little sprints to do. Here's what we're going to do in the next 3 months and then the following 3 months. So there are ways to make this feel a little bit less overwhelming. Let's go to the next slide. For this one, we really want to highlight, and I know we're always trying to pack so much into our webinars, but we don't want to rush through this. We know, and hopefully you all know and are seeing on an ongoing basis, that some of the most important expertise to bring into diligent recruitment planning, including implementation planning, is the expertise of people with lived experience. They know this work and the impact of this work and what works and what doesn't better than probably all the rest of us combined. And so really looking at, as you think about developing implementation plans, engage people with lived experience, engage young people who have been in foster care, who've been adopted, who've been in kinship care, engage experienced caregivers and foster parents, adoptive parents, kinship caregivers, engage families of origin. Hear those perspectives, and you may have done that as part of your development of your overall diligent recruitment plan. Keep that going for implementation planning. And even if you didn't do that for developing your diligent recruitment plan, it's even more important then to have these voices at the table for implementation planning. They really can bring in perspectives that we might not think about. They can certainly help us think about how to prioritize when we're thinking about what are those things that we should stop doing or scale back. They might say, and everyone has different opinions, but I've heard from many, for example, foster parents who say, I really appreciate that you send me a birthday card or a thank you card at various times of the year. But if you're choosing between that and something else, like, here's something I would rather have you do, or here's how I would feel supported differently. Or if you're going to do that, use that as an opportunity to send me some information about support services in my area. So they can really help you think about things differently and sort of get outside of our own patterns. They understand really what the effects are, the real world dynamics are for bringing our plan to life. And they can also help bring in those perspectives that we might be missing, and we might have where our biases and our lack of understanding might be blocking us from seeing how is this going to roll out? What are the considerations if we're working across various communities and geographic areas? So thinking about that as a key priority, I think, is a really important part of implementation planning. And as always, we want to highlight, when you are looking to engage people with lived experience, you need to think about that in a deep way in terms of how are you doing that thoughtfully and respectfully and in a meaningful engagement. So we're not doing token engagement of people with lived experience. We're really thinking about how to include them as part of the team for planning implementation. And that means being really intentional about when are we scheduling meetings? Is it at times that work for people who don't work for the agency? Are we thinking about meeting location? Is it convenient for them to always have to come to our office, or can we meet elsewhere in the community? Are we compensating for them for their time and their expertise? We often hear the joke, but it's what a lot of places have done, is we can't just feed them pizza and say that's our compensation for people sharing their personal stories and opening themselves up and sharing their expertise. Margarita, I know you have done a lot of great work on this too, so I want to pause here and see if you have anything you want to add on this in
Yeah,
particular.
thank you. So honestly, I have gotten some of my best ideas and my best support from bringing in kinship providers and bringing in foster parents, foster and adoptive parents for recruitment events. I will I will never forget sitting down in a one-on-one with a set of foster parents and them telling me, I don't want any more tickets to the zoo. Stop sending us tickets to the zoo. I'm glad we're appreciated, but I'm zooed out. I'm not going to the zoo anymore. Fair enough. Fair enough. And it really kind of gives you that aha moment of, oh, well, maybe I should ask, what is it that you need? Because we like to think we know what's best for our families, right? We like to think that, well, we know them so well and they're so active and they love to do this. They're always out with their kids. Well, sometimes they need a break and they don't want to go to the zoo anymore. So really just having those very realistic conversations and asking what it is that you need. I was able to find out when I went into my last job and I was new to the community. I wasn't from that community, but that's where I was serving. They they were able to tell me, these are the churches you want to hit up. These are the big events that, our Black and African American communities show up to and show out. Like, you need to target in and hone in and team up with this person because when they speak, people listen. So, it's one of our greatest skills and really our tools to have it is leaning on our foster and adoptive and our kinship providers. So thanks, Alicia.
Yep. Thanks, Margaret. I know you and I could both do probably what, about a three-day session about the value
Oh,
of
yes.
their
Oh,
expertise.
yes.
So this is right. We're just having to sort of skim through that quickly, but we think that often gets overlooked in implementation planning, and we want to really highlight that this is another key area. Great. Let's go to the next slide. So again, going back to data, this is another theme that our National Center always highlights is as we're thinking about diligent recruitment, we need to be thinking about how are we making a measurable difference? And we need to move beyond just sort of, we think this is a good idea, or Alicia loves the idea of having this kind of strategy. What's really working? And so as you think about your implementation plan, you can really build in those details of what are our success indicators and actually capture that in your implementation plan. What data sources will we use? It might be a combination of surveys or, quick online polls with folks. It can be tracking things like, as Margarita mentioned earlier, if you're doing recruitment strategies, how many families based on a specific strategy maybe inquired and followed up with an orientation or information session, how many made it on through training, looking at that, so it's not just number of flyers handed out or number of people met at an event, or even number of events held maybe for support groups or things like that. But what are we really seeing as outcomes in terms of making a difference? And writing that into your implementation plan will be really helpful. So you can say, all right, we really need to think about where will we get this data? How will we interpret it? What will we look for? What would we expect as outcomes? Would we expect increases in X or decreases in Y? Based on our implementation. So really look at that and then partner with your data folks if you have them, or people who, even if it's creating your own quick tracking sheets, but really figure out what's going to be needed for you to be able to tell how effective your implementation is so that you can use it to adjust. All right, I'm handing back over to you, Margarita.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and hit the next slide. So we want to make sure that we are applying an equity lens throughout the development of our implementation plan. So we have to remember, we're not always going to be welcomed into every community with open arms. And I know that's a stretch for us in licensing and certification, right? Because we're used to just being invited in and offered cookies and milk and everything in between. But the reality of it is, there are some populations who have not had the best interactions with some of our agencies, right? So we need to ensure that we're, taking that into consideration and looking how various populations, our communities, especially those disproportionately affected by the child welfare system, how they're going to be affected by our presence. Make sure that you are pouring into those communities, not just asking them, hey, come on, come join us and be foster parents, but invest in those communities. Volunteer, donate your resources to those communities, set that groundwork so you can establish that bond, that relationship, and ensure that you can then gain their trust. And in turn, you're going to gain their support. So that's just helping to create those cultural brokers for us, right? When we have teams that may lack diversity, we can lean on our community members. We may not even always have to lean on our foster parents or our internal partners. We can start leaning on our community members. So really develop all of your implementation approaches in ways that are going to support your equity goals. Next slide, please. Plan for the unknown. It happens. Life happens. Things get in the way. But remember, the beauty of this is these are living documents. Nothing is set in stone. Okay, we can go back and we can adjust as needed. So try to anticipate any new priorities, new demands on people's time coming in the near future, especially when you're planning around holidays and some of those bigger events, right? Build a realistic implementation plan to set you and your team up for success. And build those check-in points. Now that's so important. It's really building those check-in points throughout your implementation work to make any adjustments. Talk to your team. See what their feedback is, especially if you're leaving it to them to go out and do the events. I urge you as leaders, if there's any supervisors within this group, program managers, anybody moving on up, attend those events. Provide that feedback to the licensing and certification teams, to the recruiting teams. Let them know what you're seeing. You're looking at things through a completely different lens than they are. But check in with them. See what they feel was successful. See how they're feeling. Are they gaining, more confidence in their diligent recruitment strategies? Or if they're just like, nope, we need to start fresh, or we need to scrap this idea. But show that support. All right, Alicia, back to you.
Great. Let's go to the next slide. So here's where, again, we want to get you thinking about what do we need to change dramatically? And so you often hear this word disruption. I think it gets used a lot, perhaps too much in terms of ideas of really having disruptive thinking. But really, as you look at your diligent recruitment plan and how to implement it, it's really helpful, sort of tying into my point earlier about thinking about what you need to stop doing. Think about what really needs to be pretty significantly disrupted. What dramatic changes do you need to make? What patterns, what trends, what sort of business as usual do we need to think about really making a significant change to in order to get significantly different results? And I think this is often where people feel risk averse. It's, well, we don't know if something new will work. We're worried about stopping something. But often, if we're saying we need dramatically new ideas, we need significantly more families for certain populations of children, or we need significantly new approaches for engaging various communities, well, those significant changes aren't going to happen with incremental, tiny adjustments about we're going to hold the thing on Tuesday rather than Thursday, or we're going to try sending our families information about respite, the third week of the month rather than the second week of the month. Really think about what do we need to disrupt. And often what I've seen with child welfare systems where they can have some great creativity about this is really thinking like, what if we sort of turned things inside out? For example, what if we said, we're going to stop doing any general recruitment until we can get our retention better? Or we're going to really shift the balance of how we allocate our time and energy within areas of diligent recruitment. So maybe it's we're going to scale back on one initiative so that we can say we have to really build up our approach to how we are supporting families for youth with complex medical needs, if that's a big area of focus. But think about it in terms of this isn't about where should we set up the table and move the table at an event from spot A to spot B, but should we shift and say we're going to scale back, maybe do minimal to no general recruitment and really put our effort in micro-targeted recruitment based on geo-mapping and based on other data? Or are we going to rethink our licensing approach and how we're going to process map that and really streamline that for a better customer service experience for our families? But think about what needs to be disrupted. And I know that can sound scary and it can feel like we don't have time to make those big changes, but given the need to really have more effective diligent recruitment outcomes, we don't really have time not to do that. And so this isn't about throw everything out and start completely over, but think about what those things are. What are the sort of forbidden questions? Like when I say maybe we stop all sorts of recruitment in one form and focus on retention, and you maybe got a little twitchy about that. Look into that, see what makes you nervous about that, but also look at what your retention needs are and see if maybe you're losing more families than you're bringing in. That's just one example, but we need to be having those kind of conversations if we're really going to change the outcomes that we're getting. Okay, so with that, let's move on to the next part of this webinar. I mentioned this earlier. We want to have this interactive discussion. This is interactive through the chat, so we're counting on all of you to engage through the chat. But we want to get this so you all can hear from each other and we can hear from you again through the chat, but also to show you an example of something that you could do with your teams or with your partners to really think about how do you go from having a beautiful diligent recruitment plan that you've written to having implementation strategies and implementation plan. So, Casey, if you could switch over and show the mural board on the screen, that would be great. We want to orient everybody to this. Let me just say, we know some of you have probably used mural boards, some probably haven't. We are not going to have you inputting anything directly into the mural board today. So we didn't want to take the time today to walk through all the tutorial of that. But what we're going to do is use this as a visual so that you all have this, especially for our visual learners. But you can also see how you could use something like this, again, in your work with sticky notes and flip charts or dry erase boards or mural board. Um, but this is a way to start really getting ideas out as you think about what should we tackle for our implementation plan. So we've got the zoomed out view here. We're going to quickly run through some discussion on these areas. So thinking about what your top diligent recruitment implementation priorities are, thinking about other priority areas to align with for your diligent recruitment plan implementation, looking at what's one diligent recruitment plan item we could start implementing now. So that could be something, as you think about what your team could say, what's something we could start, maybe not today, but Monday. And what's one diligent recruitment plan item that we need to wait to implement. So we're going to zoom in so you can see them more closely because we know it's kind of small. But we'd love to have you all just start adding your thoughts in the chat, thinking about for your system, for your agency, where you're doing this work, what are one or two top priorities for you implementing or your team implementing your diligent recruitment plan? And as you all add things to the chat, we're going to have our team members here are going to be adding things on the mural board just so that we can all see those getting added in. I do see a question in the chat, a couple questions about we'll be able to send you a copy of the mural board. Yeah, we can certainly do that. We can send a link out afterwards. We are doing that now just so we don't have everybody battling over the sticky notes, but we can certainly send that so you have it for reference. So I'm seeing some ideas coming in for top implementation priorities. Forming a solid team outside of the recruiter and a supervisor. That's great. I think having that team is going to be very helpful. And having that so that it doesn't rest just on the shoulders of one or two people. We often see that in child welfare systems that it's all right, Margarita, you're in charge of carrying all things diligent recruitment, and that is a heavy burden to
It's a
carry.
heavy burden. Yeah.
It is. Yep. See, inviting others to our recruitment meetings. Great. Talking about what I learned today and put it to work to do things different. That's great. Just I'm not to put words in people's mouths, but I mean, one thought for you all, if you're finding the information or some of the information in today's webinar helpful, an action step could be share the recording with your colleagues and your team members and your partners. And that could help as a kind of kickoff for some next steps for implementation. I see someone say a shift to retention. Great. Determine what needs to be disrupted. Thank you, Renee. Yeah, that could be a great whole working session in and of itself of what should we disrupt? And maybe it's what should we disrupt and what should we stop doing? Assigning recruitment and retention team specific duties to accomplish, such as gathering data of zip codes. It's a great priority to have for guiding all of your diligent recruitment work. Partner with foster families to learn from them. I'm not reading all of these. I should note as we're filling out this board, we are not intending this mural board to be a transcript of everything that you all put in the chat. We want to just sort of capture some examples. So if we don't get yours added to the mural board, please do not take that as a rejection or a vote against any of the things you're adding. We're just wanting to, again, capture some of the ideas here for you to see, but also demonstrate this is something that you could facilitate or have someone else facilitate with your team. And often, in the context of your system, hopefully you'd all have your diligent recruitment plans either printed out or, the copies on everybody's laptops. So they're really pulling from what's in that plan. I see the meet with our admission team to explore more about the highest needs. That's a great way to guide a lot of other prioritization then too, to really see where do we need to be focusing. All right. Margarita, do you want to move us into the next section here?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So next, we're going to look at other priority areas to align with for our diligent recruitment plan implementation. Now remember, we talked about that alignment and how that can kind of work to make our lives a little bit easier, right? And building up with those partnerships and just ensuring that people are all in line with one another. So what do y'all got? What would this look like? Look at mentally look at your agency and think about what the main focuses are. You know, what is the administration really drilling down and making a priority for your agencies? Okay, so we had leadership's emotional and their financial investment. Yeah, they want to put money where it's going to make the most sense, right? And we're all worried about that. You know, we have limited funds to go towards our recruitment. We want to make sure that we're being smart about it and we're putting it where we're going to be the most successful.
Margarita, I'm just going to add in, I'm thinking about some of the child welfare systems we're working with right now. I know some of the other things that they're looking at in terms of alignment is aligning their diligent recruitment plan implementation with broader agency racial equity and racial justice
Mhm.
initiatives, and really making sure that
Absolutely.
those are not just checking in with each other, but are really interwoven with each other.
Mhm.
So that, yeah, that racial equity lens um, being so foundational to effective diligent recruitment.
Because remember, these are intentional plans, right? And by doing that, and say, yep, we're looking at the equity lens. Yep, we're worried about, the disparities. And yes, we want to make sure that, things are equitable. You have to stand behind it. So it's not just about, well, we're going to throw this out there because that's what our admin is doing. It's no, you have to be very well versed. You have to make sure that you're using the same language. You have to make sure that, you're able to speak to those priorities. So really meeting our Hispanic population where they're at, technology wise. Yeah, consider your community. Look at who you're serving. Now that's a great point too, because look at all of your marketing. How many languages does it come in? Are people able to read and write with the English language, or do you need to get some translation services? And that's where again you can lean on your internal partners too. If you know that someone is bilingual or trilingual, bring them along, help them, make them your cultural broker. Yeah. And I know a lot of us are struggling with some of the resistance to change, and you're not alone. I think we've all been there. Um, so that's when we have to get really creative. I've utilized Google, Google Docs quite a bit, so that I can complete something on my phone and then easily pick it up on my computer, whether that's a spreadsheet, whether it's just a quick Word doc. You'd be amazed at what you can do. Prioritize funding to support recruitment, outreach to support media, and community outreach. Community outreach is huge. Yeah. Increasing data and metrics collection throughout the process from inquiry to placement. Yes. It's not just about that one and done, right? We want to continue to utilize and watch that data and follow these families as they're coming in. Okay, you got an inquiry. Great. How long is it taking you to follow up? How long is it taking you to get to that next step? And we want to make sure that you're keeping those numbers and looking at how many, yes, how many people came through as part of this specific event, but how many made it to the end of licensure? And for those that didn't, why not? Where's those gaps? All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next.
Yeah. So let's, as you all think about all of the things on your plates and all of the priorities, what's one thing as you think about your system, your agency, what's one part of your diligent recruitment plan or one item that you can start implementing now? And I'd say maybe don't count things that are long standing and already underway. But what's something that's like, all right, here's what we could do right
What are
now.
you gonna do today?
Yeah, what are you going to do today? What are you going to do by next week? Yep. Improve customer service. Fantastic. Yes.
It
I'll do
costs
a little
nothing to
plug.
be kind.
And I'll do a little plug on this. We're going to highlight some resources, some specific resources from our National Center in just a moment, but we have some great materials on improving customer service in recruitment and retention of foster, adoptive, and kinship families. All of our resources are free. So if any of you are looking at that customer service piece, I encourage you to look on our website and find some of those pieces. It can be really helpful. A tracking spreadsheet. That's a great one. And exactly to Margarita's point, can we track how our families, prospective families moving through our process? Where are they getting stuck? Where are those bottlenecks? Are we losing families at steps that we wouldn't expect them to? We have some of those sort of natural decision points. Often, after orientation, families self-select out, or sometimes it's after, class 2 or 3 when we really start talking about trauma.
Yep.
That's an anticipated time when people would leave. But are we losing them at other steps where we wouldn't anticipate that? And then what can we learn about making that more effective and doing maybe some more focused support and retention efforts then? Yeah, invite foster parents to our recruitment meetings. Fantastic. Yeah. These are great. We are going to move pretty quickly through this. I know just because we're short on time, we want to have a little bit of time for questions at the end. So let's go ahead and move to the lavender section of this. Again, we're just wanting to give you all this as a way to prompt your thinking, and this is an activity you can do on your own and with your team. So Margarita, do you want to move us through this last one?
Yes. Now, what is one planning item that we need to wait to implement? What are you not quite ready for, but you're going to keep that in your back pocket because we are not going to leave it flown in the wind. We're not going to lose it. But what's one of those bigger goals? I know for me, it was always my dream to put on this large scale conference, and I wanted to recruit 1 billion families from said conference. But I soon realized that had to go on the back burner because I had numbers to meet and I had my diligent recruitment plan to carry out and I had a lot of stuff to do. So what are some of those larger scale things that we can put on the back burner? Are we looking at potentially creating a an app that we can utilize? Spanish training materials. Yeah. Are we going to ask that all of our documents get translated? What are some bigger things? I know no one
Margarita,
wants to
just to
put
add
things on
another
the
thought
back
here again from
burner.
what we're I know. That's why I was
They
going to
want to
chime in
get
here
it
with an
done.
example. One I've heard is it's not necessarily meaning something is less of a priority, but it's from a sequencing and timing
Mhm.
for states especially that may have upcoming child and family services reviews. And I'm sure you love hearing about your upcoming CFSR, but if you have that coming up soon and you are anticipating that you will likely have a program improvement plan, since every state ends up with a program improvement plan, some places are saying, let's wait for some bigger changes around some of our diligent recruitment pieces until we get on the other side of the CFSR and see what the findings are so that we can really develop some of those DR implementation pieces
Yeah.
alongside our PIP. So it's not saying it's not important. It's really more like we need to have intentional timing about it. So that's
Yeah.
one example of it's not saying later, later, later without any sort
Mhm.
of time frame.
Right.
It's
It's,
really
hey,
looking at
maybe
it
we
as
need to prep. Maybe
we
we
need
need
to, right,
some
we need to
training.
get our
Maybe,
ducks in a
yeah,
row here. So yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Great. I am going to keep us moving along just so we can highlight some resources and have time at least for maybe a couple of questions, or see if we can address a few more of the questions that came in for registration. We hope that this quick exercise and quick time for this discussion was helpful. Again, for you to hopefully hear some things about what your colleagues and peers around the country are thinking, but also to give you an idea of some ways you could carve out some of these implementation discussions. So let's go to the next slide. As we mentioned, we want to highlight a few resources. I think the headline here is we want to really make sure to highlight our National Center for Diligent Recruitment website. So our NCDR website. Many of you probably are familiar with that. That may be where you signed up for this webinar. But it really is a wealth of information and resources with new things being added all the time. One thing I specifically want to highlight, we have a national peer group for people involved in diligent recruitment work. So all of you and many others are doing this work. We encourage you to look on our website and look into that peer group. And if you are interested in being part of it, to submit that request to be added to the group. It's a great way to keep getting ideas, sharing ideas, finding out how are other people recruiting and supporting families for specific populations of children? What tools are people using? All of that. Kate, our team member here, our director for our Universal Services team, just put the website in the chat, so you can all grab that. But please do check that out for the peer group. We also, this is just a very brief selection of some of the resources we wanted to highlight. We have a recorded webinar on leveraging data to improve diligent recruitment planning and implementation. I think you'll all find it fantastic. Some of you probably attended that when it was held, I think, this past spring. We also have an article on using data to improve the inquiry to licensing experience for families. This is going back to some data from several years ago from Adopt US Kids, which we're part of, but really looking at how to think about data in a way to improve some of those things, like where are their bottlenecks or what are their barriers that families experience. There's a lot you can really extrapolate from that. We also want to highlight an article from the Child Welfare Capacity Building Center for States on focusing on race equity throughout change and implementation. As we keep highlighting, we need to have race equity woven throughout all of our work. And so as you think about implementation and practice and systems change, that is a key lens to bring in. And so it's a great article to look to. And then an article called Why Diligent Recruitment Matters. We may not need to convince all of you, since you're here with us today, on why diligent recruitment matters, but it's a great article for really framing this and for sharing with others and for framing your discussions and helping remind people that diligent recruitment is so much more than recruiting really hard. It's a whole comprehensive approach to data-driven, intentional recruitment, response, development, training, support, retention, and so many other things. So we want to be sure you have that for you and for sharing with others. So we have just a few minutes left. We want to see if people have questions. I haven't seen any questions come in recently in the chat, but I'm going to scroll back and see if there were any. But I know we had several great questions that people included as part of registration form. And I know we've tried to weave in some responses to those as part of our information that we shared today. Margarita, are there any questions that you've seen in the chat or anything that you wanted to expand on while we see if anybody else submits a question now?
No, I know that there have been a lot of questions that came in regarding the use of social media. And my suggestion to you is first and foremost, make sure that you find out what's allowable from your agency. Don't go breaking any rules. What requirements are there? Because social media can be one of your biggest and best ways to get that information out and get it out quick. But remember that there's always going to have to be that follow through, and someone's going to have to check it, and staff members change, and priorities go in and out. So if you're going to start something via social media, I would just suggest you have an identified person who's going to be responsible for checking that and ensuring that any communication is uniform for within your agency, but just make sure that it remains consistent.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I will just add, I think thinking about that in terms of planning ahead for internal policies and protocols, like what are our policies as people comment on things, and what will we do if people are if they're using social media, if families or members of the community are using that to identify specific workers that they may be having some challenges with, or if they share information about children, inappropriate information with like identifying information about children. And so having those kind of plans and protocols in place beforehand has been very helpful for a lot of systems as well. I just want to, I'll lift this up since I'm not seeing additional questions coming in the chat. There were several questions related to targeted recruitment as part of registration questions. And so I'm trying to sort of address them all in a bundle. A couple things that I think are really helpful. Someone asked about like when they're doing statewide recruitment, how can they do more targeted recruitment? I think a couple key things to think about are looking at that geo mapping that Margarita mentioned earlier. And even if you can't map it, looking at where are your areas of highest removal from parts of the state, and looking at it in terms of race and ethnicity and population and other demographics, and having an understanding of where are our children coming from, and so how can we target our recruitment there so we're keeping children close to their home communities to support ongoing connections and stability and relationships. So really using that data to think about how do we target that way. I also think it's really important to think about multiple layers of targeting. So often when we do
Mm,
recruitment, we say we need families for teens or we need families for sibling groups, but we may not think about are the images that we're using in our materials or are the messages that we're sharing, do they reflect the population that we are recruiting for? Or do they
absolutely.
reflect the communities from which we want to recruit? If we need more African American families, are we showing that imagery? Um, so thinking about who are we trying to reach with what messages, what words, what photos, what videos tell that story, what data can we share? So really think about how can we become ever more targeted, that it's a continuum rather than just it's targeted or not. So we are, I think, right at the end of the time. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, we want to ask that you complete the evaluation survey that you'll receive for this webinar. We really do welcome your feedback. We all collectively as a team use that to keep planning for future events and figuring out what works and what we should change and what we shouldn't do again, what we need to stop, what we need to disrupt for our own work. So thank you all. And we hope that you will let us know as you move forward how we can help and what successes you're having. So um, we will, I believe, send out the evaluation by email. I see that question in the chat. Yes, so please be on the lookout for that. And with that, we are going to close out the webinar. We hope you all have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.